Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life. This is episode 535. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility through this medium since 2005. Today, we're talking with Kim Chestney about radical intuition, living more insightfully, and tapping into our own inner wisdom, and owning our power. Lots and lots of goodness here today. Before we hear from Kim, I wanted to mention a few things. First of all, be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app. Just hit that subscribe button, however you are listening today. And if you have a moment to post a review, would be so grateful. And also, you can find more episodes over at kimberlywilson.com/podcast. If you're new to Tranquility du Jour, a big welcome, and you can find out more about our community at kimberlywilson.com/new. Also, I want to share a few things that are coming up. One, a big thank you to everyone who joined the virtual retreat that happened last weekend. What a delight to spend 3 hours with you on a Saturday. And our next one is going to be a mid-year virtual retreat in July. So I've got a link to that in the show notes, but, just maybe mark your calendar. It's a wonderful time to do reflection at the change of the seasons. And the mid-year one, I think, is particularly special because clearly, we're halfway through the year and we're doing some looking at it, what's working, what maybe isn't. The other thing that I have coming around the corner at some point late spring, early summer is the TDJ Lifestyle e-course. So this is a 5-week course, and you can find out more information in the show notes, but also you can join the waitlist if you're interested in this e-course, and that's at kimberlywilson.com/TDJ Lifestyle. Also, save the date for our next free gathering, which is Sunday, June 20th. Our TDJ Live summer one, which I can't believe we just had our spring one, but here we are. It's right around the corner for the summer one. So those are just a few things around the pike. And again, a big thank you to everyone who's joined all the past few weeks of events that we had, from the spring TDJ Live to the TDJ Style pop-up, which was so much fun. And you can find the replay of that over on the YouTube channel, Tranquility du Jour. And then, of course, last week's virtual retreat, where we focused on reflection and looking at what's working. What do we want to take from this pandemic experience into life moving forward? What have we learned? We did some yoga and mindfulness, of course, and some art journaling around our intentions for spring. So again, a big thank you to everyone who joined and those who are with us in spirit. Now, without further ado, our guest, Kim Chestney. She's the author of Radical Intuition, a revolutionary guide to using your inner power. A globally recognized innovation leader and the founder of Intuition Lab, her work has been featured or supported by leading-edge organizations such as South by Southwest Interactive, Carnegie Mellon University, Comcast, and Hewlett-Packard. She lives in Pittsburgh, and you can find her online at kimchestney.com. Welcome, Kim.
Thanks for having me. Great to talk with you.
Absolutely. Congratulations on this new book, Radical Intuition, a revolutionary guide to using your inner power. Love it.
Thank you. It's been a whirlwind. It's so great to be able to talk about all this fun stuff with people. So I'm happy to be here today.
Well, so tell me, what led you? I always love to ask authors, what led you to bring this book to fruition?
Well, intuition is something I've always been really passionate about even from a young age. It's something that has been really part of, I think, my own purpose and my calling. So it's really been a journey. I wrote my first book on intuition in 2004. And since then, my career in technology actually took off, and I've really been working in tech and innovation for the past 10 to 15 years. So it's really been an interesting merging of intuition as a spiritual tool for growth and means of connecting with ourselves and our truth, but also this way of taking that truth out into the world and making change and really pushing the world forward in our own unique way by following our intuition.
Well, I love this. And I feel like we get what intuition is, right? But yet I would love to hear kind of like, how do you define it? And I think particularly the idea of radical intuition, which just sounds like much sexier.
Yes, exactly. So, I always talk about intuition is really, it's our connection to all that is beyond, what we would typically call reality in this world, our five senses, this moment in time, God, the universe, the beyond. Our intuition is our connection to that. So whatever name or label we give it, whether it's, there it is, there's a book, whether it's a gut feeling, whether it's a knowing, whether it's some sort of mystical experience or creative idea, all of this is part of this process of pulling down this extraordinary insight from a higher place, from a higher knowingness and awareness of our inner wisdom. And we decided to call the book Radical Intuition because it really is it's sort of reimagining traditional ideas of intuition. Because as we know, intuition's really been on the fringe. It's been in a certain way of understanding it for many years, right? We haven't really opened our minds up to it as a culture completely yet. So our idea is really to open up this idea of intuition as a normal everyday part of life, things that we can use as a counterbalance to our intellectual mind. This intuitive mind is really this thing that we have to reckon. We have to come back and rebalance to really live this extraordinary life that we see people like Einstein and Steve Jobs and all these really brilliant people and brilliant artists and spiritual teachers who are out there marrying our really smart minds with our really intuitive minds to create this extraordinary experience of knowingness that really is out there for all of us to reach if we want.
Well, can you give me an example of how you use radical intuition? Like, how does it show up, say, in your everyday life?
Yeah, and there's so many ways. That's the thing about intuition. It applies to all that we do. It's like our thinking mind, like whether we're going to decide what to wear to work someday, or whether we're going to decide where to go on vacation, or what partner to date or to marry, or a class that we want to take, or a career or a new job. Any choice that we can make with our intuition, whether it's the most mundane, simple choice, or whether it's the most profound, soul-changing, life-changing choice. So having our intuition on the ready 24/7, always there, is really part of this new culture of insightfulness that I talk about. We hear a lot about mindfulness and how important that is. But once we get into that state and that stillness, the trick then is to start listening to the insight that comes from that stillness and that higher wisdom that we can finally hear when we tune out the world and quiet our minds. So it's really this process of getting into that culture of insightfulness so that every day, everything, we're using our intuition all the time.
Well, and you mentioned insightfulness, right? And insight. And so I'm curious because chapter 2 is living insightfully. And so that was my next question of like, how do you encourage our listeners to live insightfully?
Yes. And that's one of the keys really to this idea of radical intuition and embracing this truth and our inner truth and the wholehearted change that it brings into our life. So, mindfulness has been such a powerful, movement in recent decades in our culture. It's really an important counterpoint to this very, very busy life. Like life has really called us into this place where we can go nonstop. That's our path of least resistance, is nonstop going, helping, being on our tech, doing things for ourselves, doing things for others, working. It just never ends. So mindfulness is so important to take that step back and really be in that moment and be in that stillness. And that idea of doing nothing is so important, that when we're really doing nothing, we're doing something extraordinary. Because when we pause and open up and that insight starts to come in those little spaces between our thoughts, that's where our intuition comes in. And when we can start to listen to that, then we have this opportunity to start living by this higher guidance and this true north, instead of all of these voices from the outside world, all the stuff we get caught up in that's not really us, or that's our conditioning and our false paths. We can realign with that truth within us. So that's really the key, is getting back to our center and really starting to listen to those insights that sort of come to us out of nowhere, because that's the key thing for intuition. The key defining point of intuition is it's an insight, a feeling, an idea, a sensation that comes to us simply out of nowhere, because that's the indication that it's coming from somewhere higher, it's coming from somewhere above, not our little ego minds or not our thinking minds. So, tuning in slowing down is always the first thing I say, and then listen and move forward by the insights that we get in that space.
Yeah. And, I think you raise a good point though, Kim. It's like to slow down and listen. Like, I mean, that takes a lot of effort, right? Because we keep ourselves so busy. And if we do have a moment, we're like, well, let me look at technology because I have a moment, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're never bored, And so not that you have to be bored to listen to your intuitive side, but you do have to have a little spaciousness, right?
Exactly. Opening that space is so important. And that's the funny thing about, meditation and stillness. People think, oh, it's boring, because I think we're just like sitting here and you have to zone out and do nothing. But really doing nothing can be very rich with experience, because when you get into that space of no mind, right? When you finally turn off that hamster wheel, it's like, oh, we're thinking about a million things and we're wondering and planning, and we just finally turn off all that noise and we have that quiet. Something else comes to us. It's not that we're sitting here in this void or this vacuum. It's that when we're in that place, then these sparks of inspiration, these ideas, this creativity, all of this energy starts to flow into us and through us. And life at that point, it gets really magical.
So let's talk about the 4 intuitions, right? So that's the next chapter. And I just thought it was really beautiful the way you laid it out. So can you tell us, what are the 4 intuitions?
Yeah. So I realized early on when I was, working with intuition for years, as I was really, exploring this book and trying to do the research I needed to create this message. One of the things I realized is that if you ask someone what they think intuition is, you're going to get a variety of answers. There really isn't one commonplace answer as to what intuition is, because everybody experiences differently. You talk to one person, they'll say it's a gut feeling. Another person might say, oh, it's just this knowingness that I have, or it's, psychic experiences or mystical experiences or my creative flow, right? So everybody has these different experiences of intuition and a way of relating to it. So we wanted to create an overarching understanding of what these different manifestations of intuition were really all about and how to make sense of them and really get to know them in a conscious way. So, I created this model that was really inspired by Carl Jung and the 4 cognitive functions that talks about the different ways our intuition can communicate with us. So ultimately, it goes back to that age-old model of body, mind, heart, and spirit. These are 4 pathways. The 4 pathways that we interact with this world every day. We get, we have our senses to recognize the world around us. We think and we choose and we act with our mind. We feel with our heart, and then we really connect to something more, and that eternal part of us through our eternal being, and that sense of connectedness to the universe. So understanding intuition in terms of each of those 4 cognitive functions being pathways for intuition to connect with us really explained why intuition came to us in so many different ways. So there's not just one singular book that's going to say, this is intuition cut and dry. You'll see if you read the book, that intuition is really this sort of soup of all of these different ways that it can connect with us. And everyone's wired differently. So some people might get like really strong knowings. Other people might get really strong feelings. Other people might be really creative and artistic, right? And so there's such a unique way of looking at these 4 intuitions. And I created a series of archetypes that kind of talk about, what energy embodies each of these 4 types. And the body is the energy of the healer. The mind is the energy of the sage. The heart is the energy of the visionary, right? Because it's not about your emotions heart. It's about your heart, like your passion, like your calling, and how you're going to go out and serve and change and make this world better and your life better. And then the final archetype is the mystic. And that's one who connects with their intuition to really rise above this world and experience the true connection with life itself.
I love it. And I love kind of the way you blended it in with like Carl Jung's work, it flows nicely.
Yeah.
So quantum consciousness, right? So that's like really an interesting animal. So talk a little bit about that. Like, will you explain that to our listeners? And then how do we kind of tap into this?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk about with intuition. And I love this because this is a new conversation. Intuition has gradually over the recent decades been coming to the forefront. It started back in the 70s when people started to realize, yeah, it was something that we could actually develop. You didn't have to be someone with a crystal ball who had magical powers to see in the future, right? It was actually something that everyone has. And that if you pay attention to it and you learn about it, that you can actually develop it. And, this at first was a surprise to people. Because we've been taught for so long not to trust our intuition or that it's not important. We've really been conditioned out of really using that other part of our brain. We have two hemispheres of our brains. We have two ways of processing information. And, our culture has been so reliant on our thinking mind and this rational mind, which is this sort of, I call it Newtonian thinking, because it's sort of cause and effect and it's linear and formulaic. But with intuition, we experience this sort of quantum thinking, where suddenly we realize that we can go beyond those traditional lines of thinking and do extraordinary things, go through those wormholes and know things that should be impossible for us to know, and know things beyond time and space, and really experience these magical elements of thinking that seem like they should be impossible until you start to understand quantum physics. So that's why, it's not a coincidence that over the past century, we've seen this really opening up of the quantum reality and our understanding of it, paralleling this opening up of intuition, because in my mind, they're interconnected. Our ability to think with our intuition is something that, 200 years ago, we could have never explained intuition the way that we can now. With understanding, we know there's no such thing as time, that time is an illusion, that everything's relative. Right? We know there's things like quantum entanglement and particles that can communicate when they're nowhere near each other in time or space. And so it's this really, sort of beautiful opening up in science that's happening, that's really allowing us to consider that there's a whole new way for us to think that we just haven't been utilizing. We've been using that potential and we haven't known how to use that potential. And I really see the future opening up opportunities for us to explore that more and more.
Well, and one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and I just kind of noted this too with regard to your book, is like, how do we tap into our inner wisdom and, and really get like a better understanding to connect to like our inner guidance, So these are two kind of different chapters that you have. Mm-hmm. And, yeah. And so I just would love to hear more about kind of like how. Right.
Okay. So the real trick is, they always say energy flows where the attention goes, right? The trick with intuition is, we've all probably had those little moments where we've had that act of serendipity where we just thought about somebody and then they called, or, right? Like that happens where you connect with someone in some way. There's some coincidence, or you just knew something, or you meet somebody and you're like, oh, something's not right. It turns out they're like, no good. And, we all have those little moments throughout our life where intuition has showed up and been like, something else is going on here. So these are the calling cards of intuition. This is how intuition's working with all of us. When we're out there using our minds so much, we're creating all this noise, and intuition can just sneak through in those little moments occasionally, just kind of sparkling in our life. But I always tell people we want to get to this place where our intuition doesn't just sparkle, it just shines. It's there 24/7. So the more that you honor those little sparkles, those little moments, and recognize them as something real, more of them will come. And part of this whole process of, I call it an intuition attunement, is really opening up into that space, getting into that calm, raising our vibration. So it's so important that when we work with our intuition, that we come from this place of joy and peace and tranquility, right? So getting into that space allows us to actually connect with that higher vibration information, because intuition's it's like in the cloud. It's like the cloud of data we have out there. We can access that with our intuition. Everything that's ever happened or will happen, all of that is data and all of it is out there. And our intuition has the ability to reach into that. But our intuition doesn't flow or connect with that when we're in a low state or a heavy state, because then we are grounded and our feelings will hold us back. And it's really harder to connect with that higher wisdom. So it's so important that we get into this place of peace and this place of high energy and vibration, so that we can really open up to that wisdom that's there for us all the time. And in the book, there's a lot of exercises that we can do that foster that. I have whole, techniques and daily rituals we can do, or just workouts and different little ways to flex your intuition muscles every day to keep that energy up and flowing through our life at all times.
Yeah. Can you share a few of those daily rituals with our listeners, a few that you would recommend maybe as good starting points?
Yeah. So I always encourage people to have what, if you're in the yoga community, you probably know the term sadhana, but it's sort of your daily, a daily routine just to kind of balance your body, mind, heart, and spirit, just to get into that place of connection with yourself and life and center yourself. So whether you do it in the morning or in the evening, I think there's a lot of great things that you can include in that just to keep you centered and keep you on point with your intuition. Meditation, of course, is wonderful. If you love to meditate, meditation is one of the most wonderful ways that you can open up that sort of portal to your intuition I always have to meditate with a journal next to me. I can't even just sit there because all of these wonderful ideas come through when I'm in meditation. And I don't want to miss them. So just opening up that space and allowing that stuff to come through is a wonderful insightfulness practice. Journaling is a wonderful way just to kind of sit down and kind of let your thoughts flow, working with insight cards, they're sort of like tarot cards, only it's not like they tell us the future. They actually teach us to understand our intuition. And there's a whole chapter in that book on using insight cards to develop our intuition and really start to create a language and a relationship with ourselves. And that's what's so important about this process is knowing that, intuition is a language. It is a way that we communicate with ourselves, our higher self. And right now, a lot of us don't know that language. It's only when it's really loud and clear and we get those real bursts that come through that we get it. But there's all of these subtle things happening that it speaks to us each in our own unique way. So spending time and doing all these practices helps us to learn that language so that we hear it when it comes.
Mm-hmm. Great. I love the idea too of having a journal like next to your meditation practice. Cause I'll even I've got, a little journal or sometimes Post-its by the side of the bed because sometimes as you're falling asleep or whatever, you get these great ideas. And it's you got to capture them because they will not stick around.
Yes, exactly.
Now, you talk a little bit about following your passion. And I think that, we all love this idea, right? So what are some of your tips with regard to, and you've got it as the Visionaries Workshop, following your passion. So can you share a bit there?
Yeah. So, deep inside each of us, we have a calling. We have multiple callings throughout our life usually. And, it's something that we and only we know. And that's something that the world has sort of conditioned out of us because so often we have callings and people tell us it's crazy. You can't do that. Or the world has other ideas for you. You should do this. You should do something more responsible, or you should, you have to take care of this person or that person. There's all these voices that can get in the way of that calling. So it's really important that we understand that this calling as really, it's a hand from our intuition coming out to take us to our purpose, to our path, to the lessons that we need to learn in this life, and to the ways that we can best serve in the world. We might have ideas of how we think is the best way to serve. We might think, oh, this is, I'm going to go do this and this is going to be great. But if we're not following our intuition, if we're in our heads or following someone else or doing what other people think we should do, that isn't authentic, right? That's not being true to ourselves. So if we're true to ourselves and really get back to that voice and that real true calling within us, we'll know what we're meant to do. And then the trick is to be, really to be clear and to trust that no matter what. And because that, you are yourself best friend. Only you know what you can do. And we have to find a way to turn out all of those ideas of the world and really tune in to ourselves. So this process of knowing our intuition and really, trusting and honoring our intuition and taking some risks to get outside of our comfort zone when it calls us is so important for our growth and transformation as human beings.
Yeah. Great reminders. And, this leads me to my next question, which I think is really kind of similarly aligned, is how do you encourage us to own our power, and I think this has been a really big, kind of mantra. I mean, for decades, but I think really particularly now, the importance of owning our power. So how do you encourage that through the use of intuition?
Yeah. And that really touches back to, why we, chose this title, Radical Intuition, and, how it really plays into the bigger picture, because that really is the core of intuition, is really knowing yourself. And then once you know yourself, it's that commitment to being that self in the world and standing for that self. And so much comes with that. So much alignment with who we really are. So once we start to get in that place where, we're living by our intuition all the time, we naturally start to become more authentic, right? And there's a lot of talk about authenticity. And I always say that authenticity is really a measure of your intuitive awakening, because the more you're in touch with yourself you are, the more consistent and the more true to yourself you're going to be. And there's not going to be a need to put on all those false personas, or to be one person with your parents and one person with your partner and one person with your coworkers, right? Because that true self is going to stand for itself. And that is such an important milestone. And so this idea of making that shift from allegiance to the outside world and all of the things we've been told and conditioned and encouraged to do by the world around us, shifting to making those choices by our inner world and our inner truth, that's a radical change. And if we do that, that will radically change our life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Love it. Love it. Well, before I ask you my final question, Kim, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners about the intuition revolution?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I've been talking about this for years, that we're really in the middle of this intuition revolution. And that is something that's happening within us. Intuition is becoming the new frontier of consciousness. It's the place where genius resides. It's the place where in the future, the people that are intuitive are going to be the people who are the leaders of the future. So it's so important to cultivate it for our future generations. But it's also something that's out there for in the world at large. We're seeing this shift within us and in the world. So being part of this intuition revolution really means making that shift to the intuitive side of thinking and understanding that it's one of the most important things as a society we need to do right now is to rebalance and bring all of that intuitive truth back into the world and as a complement to our super smart minds.
Yeah, love it. And it's funny that you said kind of two parts of the mind, because I often also view it as heart and head, but I love how you have it.
And you can use that analogy, and people do. They say, I think people call intuition their heart a lot, right? And I think the heart and the head, you can use that language, but you have to be careful, because sometimes people associate the heart with certain feelings that aren't intuition, right? The intuition's kind of like your higher heart, right? It's not like our need heart, oh, please don't leave me, I love you, not that heart. It's the heart that I am gonna do what's best, and I'm gonna, bring my light into the world and shine it and help others and really live the life that I'm made for.
Beautiful. Well, my last question for you is, the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So I always like to ask my guests, how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
For me, and one of and I love that, by the way, I think that's wonderful. And I love that tranquility really, that's the playground of intuition. So, for me, I just love spending time in nature. Nature for me is one of the places that really connects me with my intuition and my center, and, walking meditations, or just going for walks, or, journaling under a tree. All those things of just, being out there and doing stuff in nature is such a wonderful way to rejuvenate and reconnect with your intuition.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. And again, congratulations on your new book.
Thanks, Kimberly. It was wonderful being here.
So you can find our guest on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And there are links to each of these in our show notes. And again, the show notes can be found at kimberlywilson.com/the number of this podcast episode, which is 535. Also, let's stay connected by the TDJ Tranquility du Jour Insiders Facebook group. So I just a few days ago released what our April books are, and this is the first time I've actually chosen two. And they're two poetry books, so would love to have you reading along. And I announce those and share those on the blog, and then we comment on them and share about them over in the Insiders Facebook group. So would love to have you there. Also, if you are not receiving love notes, would love to be able to share a little dose of love in your inbox every week. And you can sign up for that at kimberlywilson.com/love notes. There's also a link to my 6 books and planner, ways to find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. and a link to shop the seasonless, vegan, locally sewn, eco-friendly fashion line TDJ. So thank you as always for tuning in. It's a treat to be with you, and I wish you a wonderful, wonderful week ahead. Namaste.